I want to introduce Mary Beth to you for just a few minutes, and then I'll have her take over. I told her I didn't want her to edit any of her testimony because I don't know what she would edit, and I like the idea that she has a lot to say. Mary Beth is married to Barney, and she has 2 children and 2 grandsons, and she lives in the Mexico, Indiana area, where they own a farm and they raise livestock, and she also works at Miami Correctional Facility, where she works in their accounting department. She had a heart transplant about 4 years ago. I think she said October of 2008, if I'm wrong. Okay, that's right, okay. Where she had to spend 2.5 months in the hospital waiting for a new heart. And you know how difficult that must be. But she found blessings in her days there, and she gives so much glory to God, and it's just a wonderful testimony to know in the deepness of our grief and our fear, God is there lifting us up and giving us hope. So, Mary Beth, come on up.
All right, hello. It is a pleasure to be here today. I love to give my testimony. It always encourages me and just renews my faith each and every time I'm able to share what God has done in my life. I do keep notes, and a few things I do read, but for the most of it, I just, give it from my heart. I think one of the words that you would use to describe me before all of this is impatience. I was a very, very impatient person, and kind of like everything had to be done so and so. I was the kind of person who'd get up in the morning and I would make a list of everything I had to do that day and cross it off, and at the end of the day, if I had most of it done, I felt like I was really accomplishing something, and that was my goal in life, was to get that list done. And I didn't leave a lot for God to do his work in there, I was a Christian, and I have been since I was 14 years old, but, he was out here if I needed him, but I didn't always think I needed him. But I don't live that way anymore, and that's what I'm here to tell you about. Some things that happened in my life that have changed things dramatically. January the 11th of 2004, my 16-year-old niece lost her life in a one-car accident. She had her best friend with her, and they both perished in that accident. My brother Mark and his wife were able to donate only her corneas. But in the deepest grief that a parent can experience, that was all they had left to do. April 16th of 2008, my 76-year-old mother, who is the sister of Uncle Pete, she passed away at St. Vincent's Hospital in Indianapolis from complications of heart disease and a stroke. It had been her desire to be a donor also. And she gave so much to others in her life. And in death, we were able to donate her tissue and some bone. You wouldn't think, being a 76-year-old person, that you would be able to give like that, but she was, and I'm sure she would be thrilled. October 11th of 2008, 6 months later, on a Saturday evening, a young man of 19, doing what he loved most in life, riding his motorcycle, was involved in a very tragic accident. On Sunday the 12th, he was declared brain dead. And in their deepest grief and pain, his parents made the choice to donate his organs. On Monday morning, the 13th of October, I received a call at St. Vincent's Hospital at 6 o'clock a.m. in my room from my doctor, and I had been waiting 9 weeks for a heart. And I stand before you today because I received the gift of life from that young man. I received his heart. My journey began when I was 30 and diagnosed with cardiomyopathy. There's a lot of different kinds of it, but the kind that I had, and it is a congenital. My mom had it. My brothers both have it. They have never progressed to where I did, but they both are being treated. it makes your heart muscle grow thick and hard. My first open heart surgery was at the age of 39. They did what they call a myectomy. I call it my roto-rooter job. They went in and just thinned out the heart muscle so that the blood and oxygen could move through my heart better. And it really did wonders for me, and I felt like a new woman. And then 5 years later, I had to have a second open heart surgery at the age of 45. I had my mitral valve replaced because the heart pressure from the disease had caused it to go bad. And so then I recovered from that and felt fantastic again for a while. But then I started getting worse, and in June of 2008, my doctor got me on the heart transplant list. I think we started in November of the previous year, and you have to go through all kinds of testing. They have to make sure that you don't have cancer, that actually they want you perfectly healthy except for your heart. And if you've had cancer or have any kind of other diseases, then you are not eligible to be put on the list. You go through all kinds of blood work. I think they drew, twice, they drew 25 vials of blood out each time. And they put you just through every test you can imagine. But they want to make sure that, my doctor told me one time that she said, my greatest concern is for the donor family, that we go to every extreme we can to make sure that the gift that they give is taken seriously and that it's put into someone who's worthy of it. And trust me, we don't feel worthy of it. But I was put on the heart transplant list in June of 2008, and I had to take a leave of absence from my job at the prison. And I'm the kind of person, like I said, I had lists to do, I had things to do, and to sit still and not do anything. They told me I was not to do anything physical. I really didn't feel that bad, I didn't think. The doctor that was going to perform the transplant, if I was blessed enough to get a heart, told me that my greatest risk was sudden death. He said, you don't think you feel that bad, but he said, your heart is at the point where all of a sudden it's just going to stop and there will be no bringing you back. So it kind of got our attention that day, didn't he, honey? So I went home and I cleaned drawers and I organized closets and did things like that to keep busy. And one of the things that's always brought me a lot of comfort in life is quilts. I love quilts, and I've noticed the ones that you have hanging here, and then there's also another one in a room around. I saw another one somewhere around here. I just love quilts. To me, the stitching together of all the different parts, just what people go through to make a quilt is just, it reflects on life so much to me. And I thought, I'd never made one, but I had all the time in the world now. And I thought, if I am blessed enough to have a heart, I would love to have something to give the donor family, because how do you say thank you? And so I kind of designed this quilt with some hearts on it, and I bought the material and started making it and worked on it that summer. August 12th, I'd been home 2 months, and I go down to Indianapolis about every 2 weeks to visit my cardiologist. And on August the 12th, I go down, and she says, we're going to keep you. She says, we want to try you on a new medicine called milrinone, and it has to be done through a PICC line in your arm. And she said, you don't have a defibrillator. I had a pacemaker, but I didn't have a defibrillator. And she said, without a defibrillator, she said, we can't give you this medicine and let you go home because it can cause a deadly heart rhythm. And I said, well, okay, I'll try it. She said, let's try and see if it works. And I thought, a couple days. Well, I'm very much a homebody. And I get homesick very easy, always have. I got homesick at church camp. I got homesick staying across the road from my parents' house at my friend's. Barney hates this, but when we got married, I was 18, he was 28, and we went on our honeymoon. I'd never been away from home, and I got homesick on our honeymoon. And we were supposed to be gone 2 weeks, and we came back after 1. But we're still married after 38 years, so he put up with me, and I married the right kind of guy, too. I married a dairy farmer, and you don't go anywhere when you're a dairy farmer. So God had that plan, too. But she had me get in the hospital there, and they put the medicine in, and I was doing okay. And then she told me that I was going to need to stay until I got a heart. And I'm like, the blood drained from my face, and I'm like, I can't do that. I mean, I'd been in the hospital for 7 to 10 days for the open heart surgeries, but the thought of indefinite was just like more than I could bear. And I just really didn't think I could handle that. Well, this is the way God works in your life. This is I go to the Baptist church in Mexico, and we have what we call the daily bread. And August 15th, it was my 3rd day in the hospital, this was what God had to say to me. It was called Gathering Sticks, and it was about Paul when he was shipwrecked on Malta. And there wasn't a lot to do. And it said that he didn't bemoan his situation. He went around gathering up sticks for a fire because it was cold and rainy, and they said they needed a warming fire, so that's what he did. It says, perhaps you have been set aside for a while due to difficult circumstances. Maybe you've reached the time in your life when vigorous activity is no longer possible. Don't despair. Remember Paul's example and do what you can do, even if it's gathering sticks. God never puts you in the wrong place to serve him. I'm like, okay. It was just like this over and over throughout my time there. One of the things that I started doing was journaling while I was in there. Sharing my thoughts and others was very healing to me. And God gave me that peace that passes understanding that Philippians 4 talks about. I was constantly, while I was in the hospital, being encouraged by everyone there, from the guy that cleaned the rooms, because he had cleaned my mom's room 6 months before, and she was just 3 rooms down from where I was. And everyone was just fantastic. It was very humbling. And one of the quotes that someone sent me in a card said, "To see God in everything makes life the greatest adventure there is." And some of the other things that happened to me, on the 18th, Dr. Walsh came in, and it was her birthday, and she sat down on the end of my bed, and she knew I still wasn't real crazy about being there. I'd been there less than a week. And she said, for my birthday, I just want you to not argue with me anymore. I just want you to accept the fact that you're going to wait. And I said, for your birthday, I will. And she said, one of the things that I never told you was that the fact that you had never had children, and we do have 2 children, but they are adopted. My husband and I were never able to have our own children. And she said, one of the things that makes that so important is the fact that you didn't develop the antibodies that someone that has been pregnant develops, and you are going to be much less likely to reject a heart, reject a transplant. She said, that's a huge blessing. And that really struck me because for 34 years, I know in the Bible, I think it's in Proverbs, it talks about the things that can't be quenched, and one of them is a barren womb. And that is just something, if you've never been able to have children, that it is just devastating. Always wondering and waiting and wishing and hoping and praying. But 34 years later, I understood why God didn't have me to have children like that. My sister and cousin came in and decorated my room. I was the first room at St. Vincent's to ever have lace curtains in it. That was a blessing, and you didn't know you could do that, but you can. They just brought in tension rods and put up some curtains and brought a quilt in for the bottom of my bed and just made it more homey, and that was very nice. Bracelets, one of the nurses there, I think she roped in a lot of people on that floor, because we were on the heart, they called it the heart failure unit. I told them they really needed to change the name of that. But the Catholic women there at St. Vincent's in Indianapolis had this little program where they would have patients, anybody that wanted to, string little plastic cheap beads from Walmart, make little bracelets, and sell them for 50 cents in the waiting room, in the lounge area. And it was just they had a can sitting there, and they just had a little stand with a whole bunch of little bracelets. And I thought, what else have I got to do? So I started stringing bracelets, and I started getting creative, and it was fun. I really enjoyed that. And I really felt like God was using me, Well, the one nurse practitioner came in one day. She came to see me every day. And she had found beads in her attic. And she said she remembered she had some up there, and she said, I never used them. And I thought, why not give those to Mary Beth, and she can use them. So she brought them in, and there were some little hearts, little greenish-colored hearts. And so there was enough to make 5 bracelets, and there was about 5 of us waiting on that floor, 4 hearts at the time. So I made these bracelets, and I went around and passed them out to the other transplant people that were waiting on transplants. And that night, I walked into the bathroom and pulled the door behind me and hadn't flipped the light on yet, and it glowed in the dark. Those little hearts that she had brought me glowed in the dark. And that was another way that God just blessed my heart. I had been there about 6 weeks when when you're in the hospital and you're on telemetry, you can only go so far. You can't walk all over. You have to stay within range of the telemetry. And so I walked up and down the same halls over and over for all these weeks. And one of the other guys that was waiting, we always stopped by each other's rooms to encourage each other and talk to each other. And he said he walked in this other area that had big windows, and I said, I didn't know we could walk over there. And he said, well, I do. And I said, well, if he can, I can. So I walked over to that area, and it was a beautiful sunshiny fall day. And because my room had a window with beautiful lace curtains, but it looked out on the top of a roof, and you really couldn't see much. So I got to see beautiful trees across that had started changing color. And on Peyton Manning's Children's Hospital was to the left, and there's beautiful, glittery, shiny, they look like balloons on the side of the building kind of, but they just glimmer and sheen in the sunlight. And as I was watching them, to the left, something started moving on top of the building. And I noticed it was red, and it was lifting up over the building. And then there were streamers hanging down. I said, somebody lost their balloon. I could just see, when you're at a fair or something, the balloons are flying up in the air. And the balloon was lifting up, and it was shimmering, and the breeze turned the balloon, and it was a red heart. I kid you not. And after all those weeks there, you begin to think, is this really going to happen for me? But I had not resigned myself, but I had just put it within my heart that it didn't matter whether I did get a heart or not. I felt at peace no matter what happened. I really wanted to live, but I was also at peace with dying because I knew that, that God had a much greater place for me anyway there. Another thing that happened, one of my night nurses, she was just a precious, precious lady. She came in one evening with a little gift bag. And she told me that she had run the mini marathon in Indianapolis in May. And she said how hard it was to run that race, and that she had just had a baby a few months before that. And she said she really struggled, but her husband stayed right beside her the whole time. And she finished the race, and she got a medal for it. And she said, I think the race that you're in is a race for your life, and it's so much more important than the race that I was in. And she said, I want to give you my medal, because she said, I want you to remember how important the race is that you're in. And it was just so encouraging to me. And of course, she said how much I encouraged her, but I just think God uses it both ways so much. And I think we don't even have any idea what we can do to other people when we're not even aware of it. I'll never forget a girl, she was in her early 30s, and I was 52 at the time, and she had been waiting on a heart, and she was like 6 foot tall, and she was very, very thin, and she had been very ill. She'd lost all her teeth and everything because of her heart disease. And she was waiting in the room right next to mine, and she got a call before I did. She came in after I did, but she got her heart before I did, and she called me over to her room, and she wanted me to pray with her before she went down for surgery. And she felt bad that she got her heart before I did, and I said, don't. God has a plan, and this is your heart, and mine will be coming. I'm not, I'm okay with that. On the 63rd day I was there, October 13th, I got my call from Dr. Walsh in the morning, and I made a phone tree, and I called Barney, and he called probably Matt and got a hold of him, and I called one of my sisters, and we all called each other and just kind of filtered out. And then everybody started coming to my room that day. They put you through blood transfusions and a bath. This is really kind of disgusting, but I'd been there 63 days and I hadn't had a shower or a bath. I wasn't allowed to get in the bath. You get really good at those, doing it out of the sink. I got real good at that. But anyway, I had to use this real antiseptic stuff and get myself as clean as I could for surgery. And that was like 6 o'clock in the morning is when they told me. And all the nurses and the orderlies, everybody on the floor, they would come in. They just kind of made a line to my bed, and they all gave me hugs, and they told me they were praying for me, and they were so excited that I was getting a heart. I went down then at about 5:30 that night. They took me down for surgery, and at 7:30 is when it actually started. And one of the things about having a transplant is they take you down and they prep you, they put you out, but they don't actually start the surgery until the organ that has been taken from the deceased person is right there, and they can see it and they know that it's going to be viable. Then they cut you open, because they hate to cut you open, have you ready, and then something happen with the heart. Healing from heart surgery is not that much fun. So it was about 7:30 when they started, and I think 3 a.m. the next day when my surgery was over. I don't remember much that week after surgery. I got very ill, and my kidneys wanted to shut down, and they put in a port to do, what's it called? Dialysis, yes. But they ended up not having to. My kidneys finally kicked in. I think that little port scared them, and they started working finally. But the night before I left the hospital to go home, and at this time I really didn't know a lot about my donor. I do know that when I went down for my first echo, which is when they run the machine over your chest, just like they do when you're having a baby, so you can see the baby in there, you can see the heart on the monitor. And to see for the first time that my heart wasn't in there anymore, and there was this new young heart beating in me that was beating so strong, and to hear it, that was really, it was awesome, but it was difficult too, because during this whole time I kept thinking, somebody's got to die so that I can live. And it's hard to wrap your mind around that. And I kept telling myself that I wasn't causing this person to die. But it's a very difficult thing to, and they put you through some of those mental things too when they're trying to get you ready for transplant, because they know that that's one of the things that you eventually think about. So my last night in the hospital, Barney came down, and he was going to sleep on the pull-out couch that night. We were watching the Colts, I think, or somebody on football, and the Lord spoke to me, and I have grandchildren, and I wanted to be able to explain. My youngest was 5 years old at the time, and I wanted to explain to him how do you tell a 5-year-old that grandma got a new heart? I mean, they had told him, and he had been to the hospital to see me before transplant and everything, but they don't really understand that somebody had to die for you and all. And how do you explain that to kids without it scaring them? And so I thought, I'll just write him a little book, and I'll do something up for Christmas for him, because this was, towards the end of October. And so I wrote the words that I would put in this book, and it didn't take me very long at all, maybe an hour and a half. And then I kind of put it aside, and then I got to go home. I was so excited. My first time home in 2.5 months. I went through the house and turned every light on in the house, because in the hospital they're all overhead lights. And there is nothing like having a lamp on, a lamp that just warms the room. And I turned every light on, and Barney went around shutting them all off behind me. But it was so good to be home, so good to be home. And I would sit there in the morning. I'd get up early in the morning, and it's when I do my devotions and read the Bible. And I sat there one morning, and I had been so high on life and so excited about all that had happened to me. And like I say, I didn't know much about my donor at the time, and it hit me that I did know that he was a young man of 19, and it just hit me that this young man had to die, and why? One of the things that amazes me is how all of it worked out for good. If you look at the people involved in the book, and in the book, I didn't tell you this part, eventually I did go back to work 2.5 months after transplant, because I work in an office and I sit, so it wasn't anything real taxing. But I was doing great. You have to go through a lot of biopsies. They literally go in like a catheterization, and they stick a tube up to your heart, and they take little pieces of your heart, and they test them every week for the first couple of months to make sure that you're not rejecting. And that's how they find out if you're rejecting or not. But anyway, I got back to work, and I wanted to do something with the book. And I took the words to work, and the chaplain, one of the housing units there, we have 3,200 offenders at Miami Correctional. It was one of the biggest in the state of Indiana. And they have a housing unit called the Plus Unit, and it is a religious unit. And they have to do community service projects to help them earn their good time. And so I asked the chaplain if they had some good artists, if they might be willing to illustrate my book for me. And he said, well, I'll sure ask. And he got some guys together, and they came. I went inside and met with them and gave them each a copy. I just typed up and printed off the book, the words, and I left spaces blank, like where I would want pictures, and I said, just, dream up whatever you think, would look good in that space. And when the one gentleman was the first one to give me his version of it, he did the neatest things, and one of the neat things was he took, on each page, there is a half a heart. And as you turn the page, there's the other half of the heart. Totally, he dreamed that up all by himself. And he put farm scenes in there. He did a wonderful job. And there's my balloon story. Everything in here is just the way life happened. And he drew this picture of a church. I thought that was so neat. But he did a wonderful job. And he did this all with things that were in his cell. He had some markers, and he had colored pencils. And that is what he did all his drawings with, and the color and everything is his. They didn't do any of this afterwards. But one of the things I did tell him was that Grandma in this book, because it's called Race Me Grandma, because my grandson, Gavin, always wanted me to race him around the farm. Come on, Grandma, race me, race me. And I got too sick to be able to race him, and so that's kind of the reason that I called it this. But one of the things, the grandma was short, fat, and gray. And I told the guy, afterwards we had to meet to do an article for one of the local newspapers, and so I got to see the offender again, and they were asking me questions about the book and if I liked it, and I said, well, everything except for the grandma. I said, she's short, fat, and gray. And I looked at the guy, and he says, ma'am, I am so sorry. He said, when I met you, all I could remember from when I met you was the fact you had glasses. I said, that's okay. He got the important part of the story right. The illustrator of the book had been incarcerated many years and probably wondered whether his life was worth living. A young man of 19 was brain dead with no hope of recovery, and a mother in the darkest day of her life chose to have a part of her son live on in another. Because of God's prompting, I wrote a book that was illustrated by a man with little hope, who was inspired by what he read and has inspired others with his drawings. God will take any circumstance and turn it out for good. We just have to be obedient to his call. Since that time, it was 2 years after my transplant that I met his mother. When you've had a transplant, you're not supposed to know the particulars. They give you the basic. He was 19, he died in a motorcycle accident. That's all I had known. They allow you to write, the families are allowed to write, but you have to do it through IOPO, which is Indiana Organ Procurement Organization. I would write a letter, and I wrote a letter and boxed up my quilt in December after my transplant in October, and I sent it to the office in Indianapolis. They, in turn, contacted her and said, we have this from your recipient, and would you like it? I mean, when you let us know when you want it. And so she accepted it, and then she wrote a letter back and gave it to them, and then they called me and said, we have a letter and we have pictures, do you want them? And that's the way you do for the first year. And at the end of the first year, if both parties are agreeable, they will allow you to meet. But you have to sign a waiver and everything. Well, we signed waivers, and I got my letter in the mail telling me who she was and where she lived. And she got my letter about me the same day. And I asked my brother, who had lost his daughter, I said, should I contact her first, or should I wait and let her contact me? And he said, I would wait and let her do it in her time when she feels ready. So she called. She wanted to meet. She decided she wanted to come to our farm. I kind of thought maybe we should do it at a restaurant or someplace impersonal, but I just thought, okay. So she wanted to come to the farm, and she came. I was so nervous waiting on her to get there. I mean, what do you say to the mother of your heart? And she got there, and she was beautiful and young. Justin was her only child. And we talked for like 4 hours, and she was extremely easy to talk to. Wonderful, wonderful, and so gracious about the whole thing. Never once made me feel guilty about him having his heart. At the door, as she was getting ready to leave, Barney gave her a big hug and told her thanks for being willing to donate, because otherwise he'd be living there by himself. And she said, at the hospital, when you're going through that, and your child is laying there and you know they're not going to make it, and she said, you want to donate, but she said it's so hard. There's so much going on and so much paperwork, and you have to wait for all the coordination of all the doctors that are coming to take the organs and all. And she said it took like a day and a half after he was declared dead, or brain dead. And she said, I just wanted to leave. I just wanted to go home and say, forget it. I'm going home. I'm not going to go through this. I just want to go home. And she said, I'm so glad I didn't. I'm so glad I went through with it. And yeah, so am I. But one of the things I said to her that God kept bringing to my mind was the fact that the heart that was beating inside me used to beat inside her. It started out inside her when she was pregnant with him, and now it's in me. And that God can work such miracles. Who would have ever dreamed in a million years that that would have happened? We have met for lunch a few times since that time. She's met my son and his family, not my daughter yet. She wasn't around at the time. But I got to meet his grandmother, too. And it just, the whole thing, it's just amazing what God can take you through. And I guess what I want to impress upon you the most is that 2.5 months that I waited was the best 2.5 months of my life. God had to lay me flat on my back and get my attention and put my old heart where it needed to be, and get my mind where it needed to be, and develop the kind of relationship that he wanted with me. And I would have never had that if I would have just, like gone in and got the heart and came right back out. He put me through all that for a reason, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. I would, because it was just everything that happened. There was so much more, but it's just all wonderful. The year after we started meeting, it wasn't just it was a year ago at Christmas. I got a package in the mail from his mom, and she had sent me one of his racing trophies. He was a motocross racer, and she sent me one of his favorite trophies, and she sent me a photo album that she had put together of him. They were all 8x10, and every picture was as his life progressed. She started with when he was a brand new baby. Beautiful, beautiful boy. And just as he just grew up all through the book. It was the hardest thing since transplant that I have had to do, is to look at that book and to just feel I'm a mom, and I know I don't know what it's like to lose one, but to know that she had to sit there and she had to go through these pictures and pick out the pictures that she wanted to give me to show me, what a wonderful young son she had. But she wanted to share that with me. A card somebody sent me said, "God's grace has lifted you up, stood you on your feet, placed you on a road, given you a destination, filled you with purpose, provided you with hope, and guaranteed you a future. God calls us all for a purpose, and he who begins a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. I am privileged to stand here before you today because of what God has done in my life. And until his work with me is done, I'm going to continue to tell people, because it's important. It's important for me that I don't forget. And it's also important that I don't want people to forget, this is Justin. This is the young man whose heart I have. And he is a very beautiful young man that never got to reach adulthood. And I just want you to know what people go through and what Christ can take you through. And I'm just going to continue on until he leads me home. And I want to thank you very much for letting me share my journey with you. If you have any questions, I think we're going to be fellowshipping out there. I have a lot of the books are out there. I don't charge for the books. If you want to make a donation, I have a little box out there. The money would all go to Indianapolis. There's a group that's called Sharing Hearts down there, and it's for people that have had heart transplants that don't have insurance, and it helps them because it's very expensive, and the medications are extremely expensive, and you have to take them the rest of your life. And that's, if anybody buys a book, that's where the money goes to. But, and there's some pictures out there. There's a picture of the young man, or the gentleman that illustrated my book. There's a picture of my heart surgeon. And if anybody has any questions about organ procurement, about IOPO as an organization, if you haven't signed up to be a donor, you're never too young or too old. It really amazes me that it doesn't matter how old you are, God can use you. And so I just want to thank you very much for letting me share my blessings with you.